Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind, Season 4 from Seattle. I told my wife this morning, I feel like it's Christmas morning because of this show. I like it so much. Let's watch.
I'm Vanessa Lachey.
And I'm Nick Lachey.
Lachey, not Latchy.
In my soul, like, yes, this is the person for me. I want to have that feeling walking out of here.
He's here. I just have to find him.
You finally have the chance to fall in love with somebody based solely on who you are on the...
So I was wondering, out of the 30 cast members, if I would know any of the individuals, and I do. I don't know if I'm going to talk about that. It's not really someone I know very well, but I do know of them at least. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe I'll have them on the show if they want to come on the podcast and talk.
Fall in love and find somebody you want to spend the rest of your life with, you'll get engaged.
Then you will see your fiancé for the very first time.
And in just 4 weeks, you will be at your wedding. You have to make the most important decision of your life. Will you get married?
The other thing I'll say is that there seemingly is a lot more Asian Americans, which I like to see. Seattle, the West Coast, tends to have a lot more Asian Americans, such as myself.
You spend the rest of your life as husband and wife. Or, in that moment, will you walk away from each other forever?
Is love truly blind?
Another thing that I'm noticing is, I don't know if it's just my memory is bad, but there seem to be a lot fewer white people on the show. White people are fine. I'm half white. My mom's white. My wife is white. I don't know why I have to say that, but I like to see diversity. I think all of us do, hopefully. And so it's nice to see that those from my town are representing in that way. It's nice. Another thing that I'll say is that I was talking with my hair cutter, and she was talking about, is a hairdresser, right? I'm supposed to say, but I don't know. She doesn't dress my hair. She cuts my hair. She's a cutter of hair. She's a hair cutter. I don't know. A stylist. She doesn't style my hair. What my hair cutter said was that apparently the show had a hard time finding enough people in Seattle to be on the show. They couldn't find 30 people to be on the show. So they had to widen the radius even to Portland, Oregon to get enough people to be on the show. So I don't know. It's just rumor, but apparently not everyone is actually from Seattle. It doesn't really matter, right? It got me thinking about the different cities that this show has been centered in, right? Anyway, it got me to thinking about the cultural differences in these different areas. I mean, Atlanta is pretty different from Dallas, which is pretty different from Chicago, which is pretty different from Seattle. Is it something about Seattle that makes it harder for a show like this to find people willing to be on a show like this? And I don't know. It's an interesting question. I could imagine that people from Seattle are too busy for it. I mean, because they have to take off a fair amount of work to do this sort of thing. My anecdotal impression of Seattleites is that they're overworked. There's a lot of tech people. There's a lot of Microsoft and Google and Amazon people. People who work at Boeing can be overworked as well, Boeing, the airplane manufacturer. And there's a lot of ancillary companies around that. In fact, that's what I used to do before I was a therapist. For a couple of years after I got my bachelor's degree, I worked for a market research firm, and we would do contracts with all these different companies in the early 90s, Microsoft being one of them. In fact, for those in the know, I actually worked on the market research team for Windows 95, if you're familiar with all that. The different shows, stage shows where Bill Gates would be dancing on stage, that kind of thing. Then I decided I didn't want to do that anymore, and I decided to become a therapist. Or people in Seattle are too shy. I could imagine that being true, that they're not that extroverted in that way, the way that people from other towns might be. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh my gosh, ladies. Bye. Dating on dating apps, it is so easy to find a boyfriend. They're like, oh, let me have sex with you. I'm so sick of that. My parents were like, why don't you just go meet a guy at a bar? Who does that anymore?
What's your name?
Chelsea.
I'm Kwame.
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting time for single people, because back in the day, you would meet people without the internet, obviously, without phones, without apps, and you would meet people at bars, you would meet people at parties, you would meet people at school or at work or church or through friends, and people still do, of course. But with how busy people are and how annoying those kinds of activities can be. I mean, just go to a club to meet someone. I mean, that's not a very conducive way, depending. And it, of course, attracts a certain sort of individual. Not always, of course, but it can. And of course, with the pandemic and with more and more people not really wanting to go outside and all that kind of stuff, it makes it hard. And so you can turn to apps like Tinder or Bumble. Bumble, isn't that one? Or the others. I can imagine a lot of people wanting to come on a show like this to see like, well, I've tried a lot of other things. Let's see if this works. And while I'm on this topic, I hear a lot of younger people will talk about how hard it is these days to meet someone. And what I'll say is that it's never been easy. It's not like somehow before there was the internet and this sort of stuff, that somehow you just graduated from college and you were just given a partner. The way that some young people talk, that's the way they make it sound. And it's never been easy. It's always been difficult. It's always been fraught with disappointment and pain and uncertainty and anxiety. Now, I will say that one of the factors that I think does make it particularly hard today to meet people in person is that more and more people are isolated and lonely. People are more disconnected. They spend more time alone at home on their computers, on their phones, and they don't have these group format situations where they might go out with a group.
Yeah.
Professional soccer player on our hand?
Unfortunately, a career-ending injury brought me back to the States.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sure people don't give you enough like credit for like how hard transitioning is.
Chelsea, when I say I don't know if I'll ever get over it, I don't really know if I'll ever get over it. I just started a new job.
Okay, just a little side note. When I'm watching this show, because it's the fourth season, there's always this curiosity as to who will make it to the end, right? Because from previous experience, they will show a lot of different people at the beginning, but they usually will zero in on a few different individuals because they know that they're going to make it to the next phase. So I'm wondering if Chelsea is one of those people. I don't know, because they're focusing on her. But I will say that she exhibits empathy. Now, who knows? This is edited pretty severely, so I don't know how she compares to the other cast members, but right away, there's a moment where he's talking about having a pretty devastating injury, which ended his professional soccer career. And so she showed empathy. She's like, wow, that's hard. I bet you a lot of people don't really recognize how difficult that would be. And, it's a good response, good sign of her empathy and attunement.
Kwame.
Yes.
I love it.
I actually was going to use the name Alex instead. Because I just feel like, Kwame just like puts me in this very specific area.
I'm really happy that you used your name. I feel like it just kind of speaks to like core values. That's definitely so important. Like, cause for me, I think I feed really hard.
Yeah. So I don't know what Kwame's motivation was to potentially use the other name of Alex, but I can speak from my own family. My own ancestors came from Japan and other places in Europe many years ago, but my Japanese ancestors came over around the year 1900, 123 years ago, and many of them would use Anglo names, would use white American names so that white Americans wouldn't be confused. This is a common practice. Sometimes people will just do it because it's just easier, but I think a lot of the times it's done because people who have names that don't fit neatly into the expectation of mainstream white America will be shamed for their name. Also, there's a pressure to assimilate to the culture, to become Americanized, this sort of thing. So it is a bit of a shame. And when I hear people will be doing that, I actually will ask them, do you use that other name because you want me to use your other name, or do you want me to call you by your name? And invariably, in my anecdotal experience, they will say, well, yeah, if you want to call me by my name, then please, but I don't want to put you out. And I'll be like, no, it's fine.
For me, I think I feed really hard off like people's energy. I would kind of maybe consider myself like an empath. So it's like important to surround myself with like really genuine people. Okay,
so little side note on the construct of the empath. People will use this term sometimes. It's not a clinical term. It's not even a scientific term. It's a pop culture term that people will use. And I think what people mean by it, and I think she indicated that she thinks of herself as an empath, meaning that I think she thinks of herself, and it could be true, that she has an above average absorption or reactivity or noticing of other people's emotional states, of other people's experiences, whereas other people might be below average, right? Some people might be oblivious to what other people are going through, or internal, right? They're on the bus and someone is as having some kind of anger episode, and the internal person might not even notice. You might have a partner like that, right? If you're more empathetic, if you're more noticing and more reactive to that, and you have a partner, and you get off the bus, or a friend, and you're like, oh, did you notice how that person was so angry? And your friend's like, huh? I didn't even notice it. And so that could be one dimension that people are talking about when they're saying, I'm an empath. Another possibility that I have seen anecdotally is that people will identify as being an empath because when they were growing up, they needed to notice their parents or their family members' emotional states because their survival depended on it. If you have a parent who's abusive or has rage issues or an addiction issue, your life depends on being able to really closely notice the mood and the state of your parent. And so you become very good at noticing. Your neurons actually will orient themselves to being very noticing of that, even when you don't really care to notice. You might be on the bus and there could be someone having an anger episode, and in your head you're just like, well, it's okay, it's not a threat, but it might be overwhelming because your neurons, what wires together fires together, and so you can't help but to notice, and it might actually kind of bother you that you can't turn it off, right? So that's one path to noticing, and of course that sacrifices yourself, because the more attention you have outside of you, the less attention you have to give to yourself, and so you can ignore your own state. Another path towards what I think people are calling themselves empaths are people who grow up with preoccupied attachment. They have inconsistent parenting attunement and thus become, as a child, attuned or oriented towards trying to game the system. You know, if you have a parent that is sometimes there for you and sometimes not, sometimes this could be a divorce could happen, or you could have a parent that works sporadically, or you could have a parent that has a lot of mood swings or something. There's just various different reasons as to why a parent would be inconsistent with their attunement to you. Then the child, as a strategy, will say, okay, well, in order for me to get what I need, which is consistent, more attunement, I need to game the system. And this is all subconscious, mostly. There's a whole suite of things that preoccupied people will engage in, and listen to all my episodes on preoccupied attachment and attachment issues, attachment styles. But one of them is to notice other people's emotions, and so you can game the system. If your parents are sad, you can attune to your parents and become parentified, and then they will care that you're caring for them, and you will get a little bit of attunement from them. So being very noticeable of that is important in your life. What this can do, though, as an adult is, say you had a parent that was frequently angry and critical, and you learned that, well, when in doubt, if my parent's kind of quiet or in a bad mood or a little distant, then I'm just going to assume that they're angry at me and they're critical, because that's usually true. That becomes a template, a schema that we carry forward with us, and then as an adult, you might have someone like this who will have a friend or a coworker or a spouse or even their own child who is cold and distant and shut down a little bit, but it has nothing to do with the individual, but they will assume that it does because that was generally true when they were growing up. And so they will believe wholeheartedly that this other person is angry at them when they aren't really. So they have this distorted belief about what's going on in other people. And then they will go to the person and they'll say, like, I knew someone like this that would do this to me. And she would come up to me and she'd be like, so are you angry at me or something like that? This was not a client. And I would say, huh? What? Where did this come from? And now I'm in this position, and she seemed quite sure of herself. And so I'd be in this position of now I was guilty until proven innocent in her eyes. And so I had to somehow prove that I wasn't, no, I'm not. Why well, I don't know. You just seem quiet. And I'd be like, and this was not someone I was involved with. This is someone kind of distant from me, but would occasionally just kind of surprise me with this. And it was weird to me. And I think she considered herself a bit of an empath. And I thought, no, you're not. You're distorting. You're projecting. You're displacing. You're transferring. You're not an empath. But then I would get upset at her because it's like, now I'm in this position and you do this to me often. You're often assuming how I'm feeling when I'm just sort of, I don't know, tired or something. And you're not an empath. You're actually the opposite. You're you're terrible at guessing what other people are feeling. Now, might she always be that way? I don't know. I mean, for myself, it's important for therapists to have empathy and to be particularly good at noticing other people's emotional states. So according to that definition, I would say that I am that sort of empath. Another thing I'll say is that the construct, the label, it's often a self-label that people will say, will often come across like they have some sort of special supernatural power or something. She's not indicating that, but I want to also say that that's not necessarily supported by the data.
Yo, I'm telling you, when you have like a good mindset and you just like, you're optimistic.
It's when you manifest,
happen.
like you attract it.
Yes, it's crazy.
So then we hear the empath and manifest. And I talked recently about manifesting. I don't know what she means by it, but I won't go into that whole talk again. But just in brief, there's this belief that if you believe in something, or you ask the universe for something, or you focus on something like, I want to manifest my perfect life. I want to manifest that I'm going to find my soulmate. I want to manifest my career. I want to manifest getting that house I always wanted to have. And there's a belief in the supernatural that it will, the universe or angels or something will give it to you. And if that's what you believe, and it's a supernatural belief, a religious, spiritual belief, it's fine, of course. There are a lot of religious, spiritual, supernatural beliefs that people have, and that's fine. It's a supernatural belief. But some people believe that it's scientific, and it is in a sense, in that research shows that when you remind yourself of something, you will orient your life in that direction, even without you knowing, right? If every day you wake up and say, I'm going to find my soulmate, then you're going to spend more time maybe keeping an eye out for a soulmate, or keeping a good attitude about it, making sure that you bring it up with friends. Hey, I'm trying to manifest my soulmate. It reminds people, oh yeah, they're looking, and maybe I should set them up with so-and-so. So there's a practical reality to the practice of reminding yourself, or asking for something, or orienting your goals in a certain way. That's the short answer to that. But I don't know, we're just hearing a certain theme, but it's fine.
Really hard off like people's energy. I would kind of maybe consider myself like an empath. So it's like important to surround myself with like really genuine people.
Yo, I'm telling you, when you have like a good mindset and you just like, you're optimistic.
It's when you manifest,
happen.
like you attract it.
Yes, it's crazy. Manifestation is such a real thing to me.
It's such a real thing. I'm so passionate about that. Like law of attraction is like huge.
Okay. So it doesn't really matter, but what I would encourage people to think about, because, there's science. We've looked into this. There's been lots of studies looking into this particular subject and many ancillary subjects. And so I feel compelled to tell people the science on that, because people will use these concepts as a way of trying to get what they want, maybe even trying to get out of a very bad situations. They might be in an abusive relationship, or they might be at a dead-end job, or they might be experiencing racism or sexism, and they are legitimately and understandably trying to change those situations. So what is the science behind achieving our goals in life? What's the empirical data tell us as to the best strategies to actually change those elements of our lives? And on one end of the spectrum, I would say there's no evidence suggesting that if you just want it, or you believe in it, or you have this notion that if you just ask for it, or do a ceremony around it, or whatever, there's no evidence that that will work. However, yes, there is evidence that optimism does help. To believe in something that it may occur actually does show that it raises the likelihood of that occurring. Now, we're talking about a lot of different types of goals, right? But generally speaking, that is a factor. There's a lot of other factors, that are not under our control, right? We have to consider that. And that's an important thing to recognize, because for one, if you have a hard time reaching a goal and you're being told that you're just not optimistic enough, or you just don't believe enough, then you can feel really defeated and shameful or something. And that's not true, of course. Another thing is that when we see other people, and privileged people will do this all the time, and research shows this as well, that privileged people will look at underprivileged people and say, well, they didn't work hard, or they didn't do what I did. And it's normal for us when we achieve something, and it's fine to some extent to recognize what we did, the hard work that we put into it to achieve what we have. And that's fine. But another obvious factor are the luck involved, maybe even the privilege involved, the luck of being privileged. For me, for example, the fact that I'm a professional, I'm a therapist, I'm a professor, I'm a podcaster, has both a lot to do with my hard work. I have worked very, very hard at this. And for the first 7-8 years that I worked very, very hard on this podcast, on this YouTube channel, I was losing money. People would ask me, why are you doing, imagine that, 7-8 years of doing a podcast, doing a YouTube channel for free, spending a lot of time on it, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and it was costing me money in the end to do it. I did it because I loved it. I also did it because I believed in it. I believed that this could be something, and I just kept doing it month after month after month and innovating it. So I worked really hard, and I still do. Also, if I had a disability at some point, if something went terribly wrong, if I was born in a different society, there's just so many different things that didn't happen to me and did happen to me that made it so that my hard work actually could be realized. There are plenty of people who work very, very, very hard. They have the talent, they have the know-how, but because a wrench just gets thrown in from the outside, they don't achieve their goals. And so that's another important thing to recognize. And of course, I hope everyone understands that. But anyway, so optimism, yes. Believe, yes. Orient your life, yes. Ask the universe or ask your life. Say, I would like this to happen. I'm moving towards this other thing. Announcing it to other people. Does that help commit you to your goals? Yes, all those things are true. But to just leave it up to the universe to give it to you, that's not necessarily a good strategy. All right, well, let's adjourn there. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.